So one of the things that gives the most power to a production and makes the people dance like crazy is bass lines. Bass lines are so interesting to us because of the low frequencies, which are just pleasing for our body. And at the same time, they have a lot of groove and they keep us moving, right? So no matter which genre, bass lines are always important. And in techno, that's an interesting thing because we oftentimes have rumble, but still we want some bass lines, maybe. So in this video, I want to give you a little overview of 6 different types of bass line that you can use for your peak time techno production and probably for many more subgenres as well. So guys, here you can see 6 different bass lines, and we just have a kick and a hi-hat loop to have everything running. You can get samples of those bass line as a free download. So just follow the link in the description if you want the samples for this bass line here, like for all of them actually. And now I will go through them one by another, quickly analyzing what's happening here, how it works, and how you can use it for your tracks. So let's start with the rolling bass first. So this is a common one, right? This is coming from like the psytrance area, and it's essentially 16th notes. And depending on how you do it, you leave the kick empty, right? Like this. Or you also maybe like you have this one high velocity or this one low velocity. This can be both, right? But in general, you have those 16th notes and it's rolling, and it's very important to have especially those two, right? You can also have it like this. This would also work. It's even a little more techno maybe, I would say. And like this, it's a more kind of psytrance vibe. So it's always great for a techno track to have this rolling bass line. It doesn't work with every kind of sound, but in general it has a very like dominant feeling to, it gives a very dominant feeling to almost every track. And the patch is very simple. We just have to keep the random phase at 0, so it's like it starts at an equal point every time. And then we have a low filter, an envelope, 300 milliseconds, like not too long, not too short of a decay, and opening the filter up just a little bit. So you can test this out for yourself. For sure, you can also use other sounds, but that's the most common one. We have the velocity on the level. It can also be on the filter maybe, or you could even like modulate the intensity of envelope 2 on the filter through the velocity. That would also work. Essentially turning this more into a bass line which sounds like this, right? Because those notes now are quieter and also lower in frequencies. And yeah, just a pretty wonderful bass line, I would say. Next up, we have the moving bass. And if we have a look at the pattern, it's quite similar, but not completely. It also features the rolling 16th notes, but this time on different octaves. And this is very interesting. It sounds completely different. We also have a little bit of different sounds. We're going to have a look at this in a minute. First of all, let's have a listen. So this bass line gives us more of a kind of moving, groovy feeling, right? It's not this like centered and pushing you down as the rolling bass, but rather like moving everything from side to side just a little bit. And that's very cool for all the tracks that want to have a little more groove. And if we have a look at the patch here, we can see that it's a little more kind of oriented in the analog style. Like we have 3 different oscillators. They're all detuned a little bit. We have a -1 octave square on top of the 2 saws, which is typical for like Moog kind of stuff. And also another envelope, this time a little pluckier. And yes, this bass line also works very well with note shifts. Like for example, we could go like this and bring this one down. Right, so it works perfectly here. I think better than in the rolling bass, but both Both of those bass lines can actually have different notes, but keep in mind, keep it simple for techno, so mostly you only want one note. Next up, we have the offbeat bass. Maybe not the most common, but there is a lot of tracks by different people where it's used in a very, very good way. And let's have a listen first. The offbeat bass essentially plays the offbeat as it says. So here we also have a note on the the strong beat, but very low velocity. It also gets sidechained here. So that's just to fill up the empty space a little bit. And yeah, the sound this time is a sine wave FM sound, and we also have some stereo width added now, which is interesting. If you add higher stereo frequencies to a lower bass, that makes it feel much more bigger and more alive, taking more space in the mix. Very interesting. Doesn't always have to be like this, but it's a good trick in some situations. And yeah, super simple low FM settings here on the warp, because the higher you go, the more high frequencies you will get, and it will turn into a little too crazy sound, I would say. We have some tape saturation on here. Again, the velocity is important. And yes, we know this from trance, psytrance, everything. It also works well with techno. It also has a very deep and strong feeling to it, but can be a little not have enough variation maybe. That really depends. I quite like this, but haven't used it in a while. Maybe I should do it again. Next up, we have the Latin groove, which can be done with almost anything, but I wanted to showcase a typical tom bass line as well. So the Latin groove is defined by those two notes that can be on different locations, like for example this or this, but maybe you see the pattern already. We need one note on the offbeat, and then in the second quarter, right, this is a quarter and this is a quarter, so in the second quarter we need a note not on the offbeat but on one of those weaker 16th in between, right? And we can even have both like here, or we can only have one like here, right? You see the first quarter has one of the weaker ones, and then we have one of the offbeat, and this essentially creates this groove that we know from like Latin music. So this can be varied a lot. You can have it like this. You can have it, I don't know, we can change everything up here, right? It could be like this. And you can kind of hear that it's always the same rhythm somehow, but in different fashion. And that's interesting. We did it with a tom here, and there's not much done. It's a typical 909 tom, but you can also do this with any bass sound and even percussions and more stuff. So very interesting, and one of the most fundamental and basic grooves that you'll ever use. Next up, we have the triplet bass, also very interesting. Not that common, because it's triplets, right? So if you haven't heard of triplets yet, let's have a look at this. You can see here, I'm sorry, my ableton German, but right here it says triolisches Raster, which is in English probably something like triplet something. So if you click here, you can essentially see that instead of having two, here's a split, right? We have this bracket and this bracket, and if I click the triplets now, we have three. Right, so if we are in 16th notes, for example, we have 4. And if I click to the triplets again, we have 6. So what it does is it divides a certain space into some number that is can be divided by 3. Right, this is essentially what it is. So the typical 16-note bass line would look like this, while the triplet bass line only features 3 notes in the same amount of time. And this is very interesting, because if all your elements are just straight in the usual way, and then you have a triplet bass line, it kind of drifts the rhythm away a little bit. But it can be very nice, but at the same time it can also lead to very weird situations, like maybe you have a bass sound that's playing like this on top of it, which probably wouldn't make sense, because then you would have a transient here and here and here all in this very short time. Here it would be even harder. So yes, you have to be a little bit careful with those triplet basses, but there is a lot of people that are using it in a very nice way. For example, Egbert or Secret Cinema. It's also a very common thing in psytrance to switch between the usual 16th and then the triplet bass. And yes, it sounds like this. Let's compare it once again to the 16th notes. You can also put them at the same sound. So that's very interesting. For this sound, I chose a square because a lot of people that are using triplets actually do it with squares. So that's interesting in the bass. And same trick as on the FM sound, we have a unison oscillator, like a wider oscillator that is 1 octave higher. So we get some higher frequencies in the upper bass and in the mids, right? And then we have our actual bass oscillator, which is mono for sure. And yes, you can vary this a lot. I like this variation, for example. I think, wait, we need this. And now we go like this. I think this has a lot of groove. And yes, if you use it right, you will own it. Lastly, we have a plucky poly bass line, and I want to play it for you first, and then let me say some words about it. So what do you notice when you hear this? We have a polyrhythm. A polyrhythm basically means that something's repeating not every 4 or every 2 notes, but every 3, for example, or every 5. So it's not divisible by 4, which means over the course of a normal bar, it doesn't completely loop, right? Because like you see that there's always 2 in between each note, 2/16. So actually we would need, like, if this was the loop, for example, so this is a little tricky, bear with me. 1, 2, 3, then it repeats 1, 2, 3. So 1, 2, 3, the note should be here, right? So this is the problem. If we put a note every 3, then over the course of a bar, it won't resolve. So it also won't resolve over the course of 2 bars, and also not over 4 or 16 or whatever. That's the nature of those polyrhythms. And they're very interesting because what we did here, for example, now, we just looped 2 bars, and at a certain point we broke our polyrhythm. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Like, so we skip 1, we can say. And we could also do this here, right? It would be a little shorter. And essentially what we're doing is we're creating a space where the person understands that the polyrhythm is over, but still it feels crazy when it's running over the beat because the person does not really know where to place the notes. It's really tricky for the brain, especially if you're not a producer, to understand how a polyrhythm works, right? So we can do a whole nother video about this. I want to show you the sound. That was just a brief explanation. So it's another saw. This time we're using a very, very short envelope and some harder distortion, a little bit of hyper from the hyperdimension effect to get this very plucky sound. Let me turn off the echo just for a moment. This is what it sounds like, and the echo is what really drives it. And for those polyrhythms, always think about what is the most, like, what makes the most sense in terms of echo time, right? Because, for example, dotted 8 notes, that wouldn't really make sense, even though dotted 8 notes seem to be the best delay ever, just my opinion, because dotted 8 notes is essentially right this, right? So this note would have an echo here, 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 so on all the notes. So you would just stack up the notes, kind of. You can hear it sounds pretty crazy also, but if we have like 8 notes, this echo will be here, this echo will be here, but this echo will also be here, right? So we kind of get a little pyramid of notes, and that's very interesting if we have it together with a kick drum. So now you have many different ways to have a bass line for your techno track. I hope that was inspiring for you. Grab the free samples. If you want to see more videos like this, maybe something about polyrhythms, leave us a comment and we would very much appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. Until then, have a good time and keep making music.